Kia ora, I'm Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Nā mai hoki mai, everyone. Today I am talking with Anna Blackwell, who is a member of ours. Anna has come from a nursing background and has moved into aged care, which affects all of us. It's, I think, one of the first podcasts I've done where I'm talking to somebody that this should be of interest to everybody, and I am looking forward to hearing about Anna's journey and also her passion for aged care and what are the challenges today. And I know she's got some ideas for the future. So really looking forward to that, and let's crack on with it. Welcome back, everybody. I am talking to a very anxious Anna Blackwell today. Kia ora, Anna. How you doing?
Kia ora, Harv. I'm anxious, but settling.
Anxious, Anna, but we're not going to be anxious for very long once we settle. Anna, thank you for your time. Anna's typical of so many people I interview who go, why do you want to talk to me? And because this is really important. And we're talking to Anna today about something. It's the first topic I think I've ever had that this affects everybody. So all listeners this affects, which is about aged care. And Anna is the Managing Director of the Cook Street Nursing Care Centre.
Correct.
I got it right.
You did.
Go me. And why this is really important is that Anna, we'll hear about her background soon, but has got a unique voice here, and that you have got the opportunity to talk about what's possible and what could be without having to beat to the drum of any corporate or whatever. And so I'm going to frame this up at the beginning. Anna didn't want this to come across as being critical of the industry, but more talking about what is possible and where we're heading. Yep?
Absolutely.
I'm killing it today, Anna.
You are, sure are.
All right, look at that. So, Anna, before I start, thank you for looking after my wife, Kate, when she qualified as a doctor or whatever, one of those baby doctors on the wards. And she arrived on the ward going, fuck, what do I do now? And she had you to look after her.
Oh, really? Those ward days, we had lots of the junior house surgeons that came through, and I remember her very clearly. There's some that come and go, but yeah, Kate was awesome from the word go. So
But she said without Anna, she was just like terrified of being up with the patient. So thank you. Okay, Anna, who are you?
Who am I? Well, I'm now sort of hit that 55-year-old mark where I feel a little bit invincible now. So, you get to a stage where you no longer kind of give too many fucks about what people think about you, and you step into your wisdom and think, actually, maybe I do know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm not the baby nurse anymore. Sometimes I still look at my nursing medal and think, man, I'm a nurse. And it's, 35 years ago.
Pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, yeah. So I'm the mother of two fantastic sons, wife of a fantastic husband, Wayne, and a daughter and a sister and a friend when I have time.
Yeah, and having time, because I know you're pretty dedicated to your work, and that time would get gobbled up pretty.
Time gets gobbled up, and I have this kind of empathetic nature where I tend to help lots of people or work with lots of people, and sometimes my nearest and dearest get the last of me instead of the best of me. So I'm always aware of that, but it's a juggle.
Yep. There'll be lots of people nodding right now with that. Anna, what was the motivation to go nursing?
Oh, well, I'd been a bit of a naughty girl in my teenage years.
Really?
And I know, you'll find Isn't that hard to believe? And I actually always wanted to go to university. I thought originally I'd like to be a vet. I grew up on a dairy farm, loved my animals and horses, and thought I'd like to be a vet. But this was in the sort of mid-80s, so I did my schooling and conservative background, I guess, family was kind of the boys and the really clever people that went to university, and I needed to, learn to be a good housewife and marry well. So I hadn't ever kind of pitched myself for very long as being clever enough to do that. And then my parents' marriage split up when I was about 16, and I went off the rails a little bit as far as taking care of my schooling. I was so busy managing farms and that suddenly putting on a uniform and being told what to do again didn't kind of work that well for me. So I went from getting 6 subjects school C to not getting UE accredited.
Right.
So that narrowed my opportunities somewhat. And I left school in my 7th form year and went off and worked in an accountant's office. And at that point I thought, I'm not going to be working as an office admin for very long. And suddenly nursing was hitting a bit of a lull in what's the word? People applying, and so they opened it up a bit further and reduced the educational requirements. And so suddenly, because I had a university, what was it called? A 6th form certificate, which of course everybody got, but I'd also had a year's work experience, so I met the criteria to go in as an adult student.
And you knew how to eat your lunch?
I knew how to eat my lunch.
Yep.
Definitely have always known how to manage my food, yes. And so I went over to Manawatu. It was Manawatu Polytechnic at that stage, and I was sort of some of the first few years that went through gosh, I'm so nervous I've lost my brain. You see, stop thinking.
Anna, was that Polytech thing? Was that a new, because up until then it was all the nurses were all through the hospital?
Hospital trained, yeah. So I think I was about the 3rd intake of the comprehensive nursing program.
Right.
And so I've sort of, so went off to nursing, loved it. Little girl from the country, arrived in Palmerston North. I thought it was the hugest city, on my push bike heading around on Grey Street to go to the Polytech for my courses. And the information, and was in the height of the feminist era, so all the lecturers were, we were like not anti-men, but anti-establishment. Yep. And nursing, rah-rah nursing, and doctors don't need to tell us what to do anymore, and learnt all about oppression, and it was all eye-wide open stuff for me coming from, and of course also we were very much learning about Māori traditions. We had 3 days out up the Wanganui River on a marae, totally foreign. Like, I'd grown up just thinking we were all the same. I hadn't really thought about
Maori were happy.
Maori were happy.
Yep.
We all got on together. Racism, I didn't know. And then,
Treaty of Waitangi.
Yeah. Nothing in our schooling, nothing, really about any of that. So it was just this, I still think of it, I think, before we started I was talking about my badge and how I look at it still and think, how can I have this? It's such a great thing. And I remember that education just blowing my mind. And I still hold on to that, and that's why I love learning still, and hearing other people's perspectives, because there's,
was that a first experience of education being useful and relevant?
Probably, although I was a pretty good scholar up until the end of my 5th form.
Yep.
And thoroughly enjoyed geography and those sorts of things. But totally, this was the first time that it really felt real, the conversations about feminism and oppression, and thinking about my mum and when my dad left, and how she didn't, she'd given up her career. She was a trained teacher, and she'd been the housewife. And I remember one of the things Mum saying to me after Dad left, this was prior to him dying, but after he left the family, saying, I don't even know how to pay all the bills, Anna, because Dad did all of that, and she had her allowance. And I remember, getting over there and starting my nursing thinking, never will I be ever needing a man to look after me, I will know how to do that forever. And I think that's one of the things that drove me with my nursing, because I thought I've always got a career, I've always got a profession, I can always support myself. I never want to not be
I
able
wish
to
I
sit.
could have had a camera to take a photo saying that, never will I ever. Yes,
Yeah.
got that one
Yeah.
loud and clear.
Yeah, and probably there's some threads to that later on with being in the aged care sector now, where there's some of that sort of fight that I feel in my belly around, hang on, how come you're telling us how to do this? We're the nurses in this sector, we are providing this care, we understand how it all works. How come no one's listening to us?
Right. And how long was that Polytech course?
That was 3 years. Yeah, so at that stage it wasn't a degree course, it is now. At that stage I came out with a certificate.
I remember that coming in, and it was nursing for dummies, and people were concerned it was going to dumb down the nursing profession. There was a stigma attached to it initially, wasn't there?
Yes, and we got in to do our placements in the hospital, and the hospital trained nurses, there was this sort of mantra that we didn't know how to fluff pillows and we didn't know how to do any of the practical things, and it wasn't true, but I guess we were really also fortunate to have those nurses that had been hospital trained to mentor us and teach us, but yeah, there's a real nursing. Eat your young. So there was a definite issue around that. But I was really fortunate with when I did my training that I still hit the health system when it had a lot of structure, and we had those senior nurses on the floor. We had the charge nurses that had been around and had done all. So they taught us how to make beds properly and how to put the pillows the right way so the doctors didn't see the openings of the pillowcases when they did their rounds, and all those things that at the time seemed completely ridiculous, but when you go up to the hospital now and see the chaos that's running around up there, you think actually there was a reason for all that structure, because it kept things tidy and therapeutic and calm, and there was structure, whereas there's kind of it feels like lawlessness up there now.
Yeah, we don't want to scare people with this podcast.
There's still fabulous people working up there, but for me, I was really fortunate to have those mentors and people, because they left pretty soon after. There was a huge big restructure sort of in about 92, wasn't it, when they took out all, suddenly there was this decision from the top that a manager was a manager was a manager, and you didn't actually need to have a charge nurse running a ward. You could have
the days of Rogernomics and all that stuff.
So we brought in people from the army and people from the banks to run clinical areas, and man, the senior nurses left in droves, and so then you did have those, the students coming through that were much more steeped academically than practically, and remain that way without the base of people there to show them, how to do the practical things as well. So it's been my whole career has been through the entire flux of change. I was employed by a hospital board. Not long after that, we went to Manawatu, Wanganui something. I can't remember what that was. Maybe that was the District Health Board.
Yep.
No, that's a DHB. That's later. But then we had CHEES, we had the Crown Health Authorities, and we had the regional health authorities. And every time it happened, there was all of the stationery gets thrown away, and all of the, letterheads change, and the car signage. And you think, man, what is this costing?
Well, I mean, countdown right now. I think you're going through this fucking rebrand. Yes. $400 million to rebrand now.
Yeah.
Are you brain dead?
Yes,
From a PR point of view, I'm just going, who thought this up as a good idea?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Doing it now.
Crazy.
And I've got an older sister who trained as a nurse, and it changed her life. And she doesn't practice anymore, but she is always proud of being a nurse. And it's interesting to see on social media, different friends I've got who are now retired or not, right? They still go back, and being a nurse is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
You know,
It
it's
is a
a
really
real
big deal.
pride of
And
doing
it's a
this work.
privilege. It's it's a privilege to be a registered nurse and to continue to be a registered nurse. Um, yeah, and there's something about the sisterhood.
Yeah,
And of course it's a brotherhood now as well,
Yeah.
much more than it ever was. But there's a common language that we have. There's a common knowledge and understanding of what we see and what we get to do and be alongside people at very vulnerable points in their lives. And yeah, it's a real, yeah. I'm totally proud of it. I'm proud to be now a senior nurse. I'm proud to bring our overseas nurses into the fold and show them New Zealand nursing and what it's all about. And I think we're a really underutilised resource in that management leadership
Yeah.
structure, in New Zealand.
yeah. And I think I'm right in saying this. It's interesting, some of the people that have risen to the top of the game in health have come from a nursing background for the first time as well.
Yes.
Before it was only doctors that came through, but now they're coming through from the nursing background
Yes.
as well. I think I'm right in saying that. Doesn't matter. Nobody's here to question it, so we can just carry on like
We can just say that,
Yeah.
yeah. But there are nurses all around leadership roles around in the health sector and outside of it, and I think that you never forget that humanistic approach that you're trained with, the non-judgmental, objective way of approaching issues and situations, and you don't lose that. That just builds and grows with wherever you tend to go. I think the danger I see is that people that are no longer practicing or registered as nurses, that when they feel like it, they identify as a nurse.
Right.
And those people can do damage to nursing and the health service when they go, oh, what nurses are just patch protecting and I'm a nurse, I know how that works. That's really difficult situation in our health system at the moment to then have those boardrooms or meetings to say, well, we've got nursing representation because so-and-so's a nurse. And yes, you can be a nurse and you're always a nurse deep down, but being still registered to be a nurse, being accountable to the nursing council, being accountable to your peers for the decisions that you're making is entirely different from once upon a time having been a nurse.
It's interesting because I know, Kate, as a doctor, peer review is everything. And that accountability, and I've heard other doctors get very frustrated with some of the alternate medicines. They don't say they're not wrong, but there's not the accountability or the peer review. And it's something that I've learned, talking to the other doctors, just how it's a thing. That if it's not peer reviewed or it hasn't been through a piece of information, is not critiqued, it just doesn't hold the same mana as coming through other avenues.
That's right.
It's a big deal,
right.
isn't it?
It is a big deal. Yeah.
Anna, I had a question for you before, and old age. Yeah, okay, it's gone, but it'll pop back into me.
Okay.
So, Anna, how do you go from nursing? Not how, but why do you go from nursing into aged care? What brought about that transition?
There was probably a few things that brought about that transition. One of them was the end of my first marriage, and I'd been I had been doing a lot of night shift work in ED and then back into a nursing supervisor after hours coordinator role, which was a lot of shift work. And I thought, is there something else? How do I get into a Monday to Friday type role? At the same time, there was a rest home that was getting into a bit of strife, or was in strife, and the owners were looking for a new manager. Well, in fact, those owners were selling and the new owner was looking for a manager. And at the same time, because of the work I was doing at the hospital, we were aware that this sort of 50-bed aged care facility may have its doors closed, and where were we going to accommodate these vulnerable elderly people and looking at ward numbers and other rest homes around the region. And so it was suggested, why didn't I go and have a look at it? Perhaps it might be something that I could do. And I was like, I'd had a horrific experience in aged care as a nursing student. Absolutely, decided that ethically I could never ever be near the place. It was a really, I won't go into it now, but it was the only time I'd ever walked out of a placement at lunchtime and didn't go back. And we bicycled back to Polytech, the three of us that were there, and said we can't go back. We've just witnessed what's equivalent to elder abuse, and we just can't do it. So I was very apprehensive about the whole aged care thing. Anyway, when I got over there and walked through, I thought, so hang on, I'll take a step back. So at that stage, so this was 2009, I was starting to really feel a difference in the care provision in the hospital setting. With some of my nursing colleagues, people were becoming so stressed that they were I felt like what we were there to do was getting lost. It was all about how busy we are, how little time we've got, and the patient in the bed was being mentioned less and less and less. So I was getting a bit disillusioned with what I was doing on a day-to-day basis in the hospital. And so coupled with the marriage breakup and needing to be more available during the day for the kids, that's sort of what led me to walking through the doors and having a bit of a look at this. And the minute I walked in there, I saw what felt like my old nursing when I'd first started, back in the days where you saw families around with people and grandchildren running around and staff that had time to be beside those people and hold a hand when need be. And I thought, I like this. I could make, and of course I was also walking into a facility that was on its knees, and the staff were broken, and I don't know, it just felt right. I thought, I'm going to give this. So
even though the place was run down and you could still feel that culture you recognise from a long time ago. And also meeting the guy that I went on to work for, I recognised a very, very flat management system. So I'd got to a point where, in the hospital system, I was trying to write a document for a ward that, had to go to a document committee, and it had to be written with the right font, and it had to have, blah, blah. All document control. I get why, but it had got to the point that it was sort of constipating being able to make any change. So, and you want to get some new equipment, and so writing your CapEx proposal was a major undertaking, and it'd go off and it'd come back because there was a spelling mistake somewhere, and and meanwhile the equipment's not on the floor and the people that need it's not there. So, get out into aged care where I say, okay, so we need this equipment, we haven't got enough, we need a second hoist, this is why, blah, blah, what do I need to do for you, writing that up wise to get that on the floor. And he said to me, well, you've just told me why you need it, so get it. As long as you've got enough money in the bank to pay the wages. And I was like, what? And boom, reality. Suddenly I'm in the private sector. I've been managing budgets of, at that stage, sort of 15 million. When I say managing, reporting on them, really not managing them. We thought we were managing them, but you don't. We're managing them by suggesting people turn their computer screens off and the lights out because we're, $5 million overspent in one area. And whereas suddenly I'm in the real world and, you can get that hoist, but as long as you've got money to pay your wages. It had never entered my head for 15 years in the public sector that someone might not pay my wages, that there might not be enough money there for that. So I liked that, and I still like that about the aged care system. Anna, tell me about the day that you decided to quit being a nurse, as in the old system.
Well, it was with a lot of trepidation, and just as you said, quit being a nurse. And I know you corrected yourself, but that was some of the response I got from my colleagues what are you doing? Why are you going to aged care? What a waste. You'll be wasted out there. You'll be bored. So there was a lot of judgment about the aged care, and there still is. But I think it was probably worse, 15 years ago or something, since I've been out here in the aged care world. But I felt empowered. I thought, I can make a difference here. This is a nurse-led service. This is not having to kowtow to anybody else, really, apart from the owner, who for a number of years was very comfortable letting me lead the services as I needed to lead them. I can't remember the first day how I felt. Well, I can tell you the first day how I felt. We had a fire. My first day, the bloody laundry caught on fire. The lint had, I don't know what the hell happened, but it caught on fire. So suddenly, we've got the fire brigade coming. I'm just finishing my last day and the fire alarms are going off. And oh, God. Oh, my God, what a performance. I was like... And, of course, back in my earlier nursing days, we'd had these horrific videos from, during our fire training shown to us of fire creeping through the ceiling and dropping down and the whole thing going up. And I was like... oh, holy fuck, we're going to be on fire. Well, I'm going to have half these residents are going to be burnt on my first day. Oh, my God. It was horrific. It was the anxiety.
I can feel, I'm laughing, nervously going, oh, no.
Oh, well, and of course, this facility had a fire alarm system that wasn't, now how did it work? The smokes were connected to the fire brigade. So every time the smoke alarms went off, the fire brigade got called. So that means every time a spider or an ant walks through your smokes, the fire brigade. They used to come down with regular monotony to a false alarm. So this particular day, and of course that was unbeknownst to me at that point. So this particular day we put in the 111 call fire. At the same time there was a grass fire at Kopani. And there was something else that happened at Bunnythorpe. I'm not sure if it was a motor vehicle accident or another fire, but there were 3 events that all happened within about 5 minutes of each other. So they reprioritised us to wait for the Palmerston North branch to come over because the fielding guys had headed to Kopani and blah, blah. So it was forever. Waiting for these fire engines to... I thought I must have rung them about, we have got a fire. This is not a false alarm. Yes, we're coming, And so I'd had one walkthrough with the fire procedure and it had just been by chance on my sort of last day of orientation with the babysitting manager that I'd said, fire, what's the fire procedure? So they weren't really embedded in my brain. So I'm busy evacuating the people from the rest home side of the building outside because I was thinking, oh Christ, there might be fire coming through the roof and the place is filling up with smoke and so I had taken them outside and back around. Well, so then the fire guy arrives from Palmerston, absolute prat of a man, and decides to tell me off. I was like, don't you fucking push me. I've kept these people safe. Where the hell have you been? Our fire thing says wait for the fire brigade to give you further instructions. You're not here. So, common sense took over, but it wasn't, it wasn't by the book. So I'm like, no, how about we have this conversation once you've got the fire out.
Go and put the fire out.
I'm not interested, mate. And you went back through. I said, yeah, damn straight I went back through because I needed to make sure that the sprinklers were actually working and you weren't here. So that was my first.
I wasn't expecting that.
Actually, I'd forgotten about it. I think about it from time to time, but I hadn't thought about it for today's conversation.
And
it was,
that was making me feel anxious. Just thinking, first day. Baptism by fire.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
And of course, that's when I learnt that actually there's sprinklers all through the roof, so it wasn't going to take off through there. But I didn't know that. I know it now, but I didn't know it then. It's good. But to this day, we do 6 monthly fire training. And I sometimes I'll tell my new staff these stories, and I'll also tell them not to panic. That there are There are sprinklers in the roof as well, but yeah. But that's what aged care encompasses. You're doing everything. There's no crew arriving from within the hospital, that are only 5 minutes away. You're it. There's no HR department that's helping you, with your performance managing staff, or if somebody's, going to take a PG against you, what you have to do. Not that anyone has ever taken a PG against me, but
Not yet.
Not yet.
I might.
So. That kind of, again, those first few months in the aged care sector, I truly realised that every single thing I'd done in my career up to that point led me to have a sort of a set of skills that that I use, even working in the accountant's office. Getting the books and balancing the books and understanding the credits and debits and all of those kinds of things. I thought, yeah, actually, I remember reconciling all those farmers' accounts back then, doing my little upside down tick in the from.
And I'm going to take a stab in the dark here, that you've got an entrepreneurial streak.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't recognise that until probably quite recently, but yes, I have. Entrepreneurial. I see potential in things. Yeah.
And then you act on them.
Yeah, well, when I can.
Yeah.
But I do still work within a system that's not that entrepreneurial friendly.
No, but you'd rub people up the wrong way as well from time to time because of it.
So when I got out into the aged care system, as I say, my most recent job in the hospital before I went there was duty managing and bed managing. And I got out there and I thought, you know what, there's a group of people that are sitting in acute hospital beds that we could look after out here in aged care. So I, got together with some colleagues that I'd been recently working with and said, why don't we look at this? Why don't we look at some of those orthopaedic patients that are sitting, older adults that are in a bed for 6 weeks, waiting until their bones heal before they can go to rehab. And there's people that are being cancelled for their hip replacements because there's no acute orthopaedic beds. And so we set that up and started that. And so now that's sort of rolled out around the country, for better or for worse. Some of the tenets that I always tried to push for that was that you had to have a facility with the right staffing levels, because you're taking on a different set of people. Well, you need the right staffing levels, full stop. But if you're going to start bringing people over that have got higher expectations of care, you need to have staff that you can teach about those orthopaedic injuries that they come with, and have the equipment on site for managing that. But it's those sorts of little things have happened, and that's sort of, when we get into my future vision for ARC, that's the stuff that I see aged care is just, we're just sitting here wasted with that potential.
We can get to that soon.
Yep.
And what was the skill when you jumped from this to this? How has that shaped you? So if we go back 13, 14 years, how are you different today because of your involvement in aged care?
How am I different? I'm more confident in what I do and how we do it. I'm less frightened, or I don't know if I was ever frightened. Not worried about having an opinion like I perhaps was. I've been able to have an opinion. What else is different? Well, I've grown. Into a businesswoman, into an owner of a business. I've been able to mentor and develop other nurses, and now I'm involved in a leadership sort of role nationally with the Aged Care Association, with our nursing leadership group, and we're not really fulfilling any true purpose there yet, but my vision is that will be somewhere where we can grow nurse leaders in the sector further as well. So,
I'm going to re-ask the question.
okay.
How has aged care shaped you?
Well, aged care gives my whole nursing practice and vision purpose. Um, Everyone ages. And of course there's an assumption that we only look after elderly people, but there's some people that end up needing our services that are way younger, that have had strokes and brain bleeds and things at a much younger age, motor vehicle accidents, that end up in our services. So yeah, I never ever wake up and feel like I know it's a cliche, feel like I'm going to work, but it's like a purpose. And as I was saying to you before we came to air, my father died when I was 25, so baby nurse, and I was down in Christchurch with him, floundering at what was happening. I knew he was dying.
How old was he?
He was 51, and he didn't want to die. He was fighting it, obviously, fighting even discussing it, apart from with his humour. And you know, the preparation for him dying, the what happens afterwards. There was no help or support. There was nurses doing, you know, very good care, but nobody stopped and talked about what we, you know, could be planning for. You know, certainly once Dad died, there was no discussion about whether he could come back home or, you know, and so part of what I didn't realise until probably more recently that steeped me and kept me in aged care and keeps my passion alive is that we deal with people at the end of their lives, and not just the people themselves but their families. And there's a lot of damaged families that arrive into our services, and so there's time for repair if those honest and hard conversations are had earlier on, and we make a space for people to be able to come and go. And sometimes it means sitting in some family meetings and helping people through some discussions, advocating for the person that's in the facility so that their voice can be heard. Sometimes it's looking after people that have been absolute pricks and no one wants to come near them, and it's our place to provide that care for them,
with no judgment.
With no judgment.
Yeah.
And helping the staff, particularly the well, they call our healthcare assistants unskilled. Of course, they're not unskilled,
Yeah.
but they haven't been trained as registered nurses with that critical thinking and objectivity and things that we have been. So helping them understand, not to stand in judgment of those families that don't come because there's a reason, you know.
And I stayed with some friends on Friday night last week, and they had just lost their mother the week before, and she'd been aged care for a long time, and they'd had a great experience with the aged care. And when she died, they could not get over how the support they got. Everybody just stepped up, and they were just blown away with how this thing kicked in to action, and they helped them organise. And it wasn't just the practical, but the huge amount of love that they received. And she said it was just amazing to see this actually step up once the mother died.
Yeah, oh, that warms my heart, because that's what it's all about, and it's being there with those families during that time. And again, sounds cliche, but it really is a privilege to be in with a family and in that space. And I don't know how long your friend's mother had been in care for, but sometimes people are in care with us for a long time. You know?
It was a reasonable period of time, and their father is still there.
Yep.
And what was interesting is that they helped manage their father, who's 92, and because they know him pretty well, and going, okay, I think we'll do this and we'll do this and do this, because they're going, how are we going to handle this with Dad, who sort of understands what's going on, and it was just like having this bigger network of brothers and sisters
Yes.
to help them
Yes.
make the decision. They just, it was just amazing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And isn't that
happened.
amazing?
Yeah.
So that means that for that family, there's no unresolved grief. They don't have to go away now and plan their complaint because they feel let down. And that's the absolute essence of excellent aged care service. And there's so many of us out there providing that level of care. Of course, you don't see or read about that anywhere because that doesn't get the clicks. But there is a massive amount of really skilled care that's going on in our sector, and really proud of it. I'm really proud to say I'm in this sector.
And look, it's ironic that these two have happened, but they said their mother went in first and then their father, and their rooms weren't near each other, and they thought this was an issue and try and and they said, you know what, we think they might be better apart because they drive each other nuts and a bit of space. And in the end, they loved it. And they used to go and visit each other, right? It was a bit of an occasion going to visit backwards and forth. And their mother, she was a bit of a strop, had a bit of a temper, and they'd get embarrassed by and go, no, it's all good, it's fine. Yep. And they go, okay, we're a bit embarrassed here. No, this is just the way she is.
We like a bit of sass.
Yeah, we're okay with that. But just the way they managed the whole this relationship between the two, it was just, they said it's just been a marvellous, what could have been a really traumatic, hard period was managed beautifully. Yeah.
Excellent. And that, that requires good leadership, good staffing levels, and a solid base of staff that are well connected and gelling together as well.
That's what it sounded like. That's what it sounded like. So Anna, what's your vision for the future of aged care? What are the things that really spin your wheels?
Well, I don't know about it's a vision, but what it is a vision. What I want it to see in aged care is that we, so I guess, Te Whatuora, Takawhaira, all this change is happening in the health service, and while we can argue about the timing of it, the essence of why it's happened is very valid. And my hope was that, the whole system was having a really big shake and that things would be done differently. And I think that's still progressing, and I'm still hopeful that that's going to happen. But I believe that our sector, to have a vision and to continue to be able to hear stories like you've just told, needs some really clear structures embedded in how our services are provided. Gosh, I'm starting to talk in riddles. What am I trying to say? So we need to ensure that there's registered nurses that stay leading aged care. And at the moment, I feel frightened that because registered nurses are such a short resource, short supply resource, that there's starting to be, I'm starting to see it, that there's things like virtual nurses that are being put in place so that we can have healthcare assistants upskilled and learned a few more tasks, and that if they need to, they can phone a friend, phone the RN that might be looking after 3 or 4 facilities. That kind of future scares the crap out of me for our elderly and for us when we need care. I believe elderly people deserve registered nurses looking after them. We don't always have the doctors there, but registered nurses know when to call the doctors or call the nurse practitioners that can come in and do the prescribing and do those things. I believe a functional aged care service in the future should be part of the bigger health system, not sort of us out here. And if you can see me, I've got little hands going of
so that you're seen as part of.
Yes. So a highly functioning aged care sector could add huge amounts to the overall system. So at the moment, we do 24-hour-a-day care for elderly people that have been assessed as needing 24-hour care, and they're either assessed as needing rest home care, dementia level care, or hospital level care, or in some instances, their psychogeriatric care. But we've got nurses that are specialised in dealing with families, having those conversations, working with the elderly in an environment that's calm and friendly, and they've got their own rooms and TVs and blah-de-blah. I'd like to see a day where instead of the elderly person that has to ring an ambulance or goes to the GP and the GP says, it's 4 o'clock, you can't really go home, I think you've got a urinary tract infection, I'm going to have to send you up to the emergency department, that they could come to our services and we could have a contract, or, do we need a contract, or could we be part of the health system that says, actually, we've got 10 beds sitting there at Cook Street, and we've got enough staff in there that we can put an IV up and we can do the first lot of antibiotics, or we can monitor you overnight and make sure you get safely to the bathroom and back again. Instead of hearing these stories of elderly people that have I've worked in ED, they're heaving. I haven't worked there for 15 years. They were heaving then, they're heaving now.
Oh, it's worse now.
It's way worse now. And while those elderly people need acute care, they don't necessarily need it in an emergency department, but it's the only place it can be provided at the moment. Back in the day, we used to have GP beds, but they weren't utilised properly, and so they've sort of gone, why don't we start talking about having them back again, and having, I've got an excellent GP that we work with, and it's nothing to do with excellent GPs, of course, it's having time, but this GP has made time in his work life to dedicate to aged care, so he looks after a few of us and provides a fabulous service. Why isn't the system coming and talking to those of us that are out here doing the mahi, doing the work, doing the with our skills, instead of talking to sector providers that aren't clinical, because they want to know how much money they're going to get for it. Whereas I want to know, how do we make sure if we start offering those services that they're safe? Because you can't offer those services and have a level 4 healthcare assistant with a virtual nurse looking after them running an aged care service. You can have that service when you've got skilled registered nurses with a healthcare assistant team working under them. That's when you can provide that sort of service.
Anna, you mentioned before GP, 4 p.m, ED, and I immediately went 3 a.m. in my...
Yeah, well, it used to be, but it might be 10 o'clock the next day now, and that's not because of any other reason than those emergencies are coming in hot and heavy.
So what would be, because it's amazing, people actually listen to this shit, it's quite, I know, it's a surprise. So what would be, for those listening, what would be your request for people who might have influence? What's your request for those people that might have the power to do something about this in this podcast?
Don't let registered nurses leave the aged residential care sector. Don't listen to people that tell you the aged residential care is just a group of tasks and people can be upskilled to do them, and that we don't need registered nurses. Registered nurses are critical thinkers. We steeped in evidence-based practice. We've got massive accountability to our peers, to our association, to our nursing council. We can't have an aged care sector that's been depleted of its professionalism. That's my plea, is to not let that happen, and then come and talk to nurse leaders that are in aged care in an environment where they're not compromised about speaking out of turn from what their employer says they should be saying. I know nurse leaders that are very challenged at the moment around that financial model as opposed to the ethical values model that we should be focused on. Yeah, I think that would be my biggest plea, is don't get taken up with trying to balance numbers. We haven't got enough RNs. Where are they needed most? I mean, we would never be having a discussion saying, look, ED, we can't get nurses in ED. I think we'll get some of the healthcare assistants in and we'll get them skilled up to put in some IVs and take some blood pressures, and we'll just have one registered nurse and they can supervise all of them. I mean, it just would never happen. And I understand looking after our elderly isn't acute as that, but it's still a skilled profession. It still requires skill and assessment and reassessment and highly honed communication skills to have those difficult conversations. I think Dad's dying. I need you guys to have a think about who you want to be here with him. It could be in the next 10 minutes, but it's more than likely in the next 2 or 3 days. You can't, not just anyone can make those phone calls. And if you don't make those phone calls, then families miss that opportunity to be with their loved ones.
Lasts forever.
Huge.
I was just thinking, and I've been through this 4 times with family dying, and it's a funny thing. Your skill level drops. Your thinking and all that sort of stuff drops. And the number of times I was reminded of, a nurse going, is there anybody else that we need to contact or this? It was just a very quiet and thinking, and is there, are enough people in the know of this? And a couple of times we weren't, because you're in your huddle.
Yes.
You're in your huddle, you're doing a thing, right? And it makes a huge difference, because if people don't have the opportunity to be involved, that fucked offness lasts forever.
Forever, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. And I've still got it with my dad. What I didn't know, what I didn't understand, what we didn't do, even, with the funeral. So even though funerals aren't our business, you have the opportunity to talk to families sometimes and say, now, are you getting lots of photos? Are you make sure you're recording these events, because you'll want these one day. And
it's one of the things, the thing I forgot to say a long time ago, right, is that I look back on the times I've been in hospital, and in the middle of the night, the difference of having a good nurse, or I say good nurse, a nurse that is comforting and one who's not, and I've had both.
Yep.
Oh, it makes such a difference to all that creepy shit that goes on in your head in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And going back to sleep and not going back to sleep and all that sort of stuff, it's just, and it just is that quiet voice who says, I know what's going on.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just thinking, yesterday, the day before, was my sister's anniversary. She died in 2000. And the nurses just made such a difference to that, and turned a really shitty thing into, that it was not bearable, but I don't know what the word is. It was a lot more comfort,
Well, and would have guided you through the process, so you knew what was happening. And that's, we know that our brains cope better if they have some preparation.
Yeah.
And so being able to do that preparation for people is a skill. Mm. You okay?
I am. Deep breath.
Deep breath.
Anna, what haven't we covered today?
What haven't we covered? I guess the other thing I think about a lot, which is more sort of technical, I suppose, rather than the deep stuff we've just been talking about. But, our sector survived having internationally qualified nurses.
Yep.
I believe they were exploited. So the system was able to survive for years and years and years by paying nurses in the aged care sector considerably less than nurses in the hospital sector. And so I'm talking no penal rates. I'm talking no study leave. I'm talking way less hourly rates. I couldn't believe that that was one of the things I also couldn't believe when I came out into aged care. I'm like, so I'm doing the wages. No, there's no penal rates. There's what? What? And so the sector came to rely very heavily on those international qualified nurses, so what we call the IQNs, predominantly from the Philippines and India. And those nurses would come in and, amazing nurses, leave their families behind to come and make a better life. And the DHB would generally not employ them. So they had to come through our sector first. So they got sort of culturally competent, practiced their English, got used to the systems, and then the hospitals would poach them. And rightly so. They were paying the money, and that's sort of how it kept working. And I was never comfortable with it. I was never comfortable as a manager with what I believe to be basic exploitation, and no one was interested. So the unions, the NZNO, didn't have a huge lot to do with the aged care sector, and I think mostly probably because the nurses weren't members, because they had so little pay to manage that they weren't spending it on a membership. And so having come from a very unionised hospital sector and seeing what happens when you've got, but out in our world, you've got, 647 aged care providers out there. So there's, everyone's on individual contracts. And so I really saw the power, or, what happens when you haven't got a strong negotiation body. And then the body that we have in our sector is, really good with all the lobbying of government and work really hard, but they're working for the providers. That's the owners of aged care. There's not really been a strong, and there still isn't a strong nursing voice for aged care nurses, because you've sort of got the fox looking after the hen house. So, if you're around the board table trying to balance your books and eke out the most profits, you're not really going to be championing for your registered nurses to be being paid huge sums of money more. Obviously, we need the government to fund that. But if you're the government and you're desperately short of nurses in the hospitals, and you know that you've got a constant supply coming from aged care where they're not paid at the same rate, there's not a lot of motivation there to put the funding through to have us all funded at the same, have our nurses all paid at the same rate. So there's some flaws there.
How big's the difference as a percentage, roughly?
Well, up until the last funding increase, it was about 25%.
Wow, that's huge.
Huge. Yep. So I've had nursing colleagues that I've worked with for years that are still up at the hospital and arguably not wildly happy, but they can't afford to take, a 25 grand hit in their income to come out into the aged care sector.
Right.
So that's the other thing that keeps bothering me is how do we get that right? Like, how do we get that? And then how do we know if we're getting the income boost in that's going to be spent on, well, not just on the nurses, but we haven't got, I don't believe we've got the right staffing levels in aged care. So when we talk about being 1,200 nurses short in aged care, that's 1,200 short from the skeleton staffing that was there to start with. And so now there's this big deficit, and now there's shift after shift around the country in facilities that don't have registered nurses on site, which used to be in breach of our contracts, but now we can write...
It's starting to slip.
Yeah, you can write a letter to the ministry, on a form to say that we haven't got registered nurse cover for the week, and this is how we're mitigating it. We've got a virtual nurse phoning in, and we've got healthcare assistants at level 4 that are doing this, and there's a nurse that's overseeing them on call somewhere, and it's slowly becoming normal.
Because Anna, from the outside, there are plenty of aged care outfits that look as though they're making a fortune.
Yep. Yep, and that's the challenge, isn't it? Because they're making a fortune, so to speak, through the property arms of their businesses.
Right.
So that's the villages, that's the occupational right agreements to a suite or a room, and that's creating a real two-tiered system of care for New Zealanders. So we're really seeing it now, the sort of the haves and the have-nots. So for me, at my little Cook Street facility, where we've got 30 beds with no village and no occupational right agreements in any of our rooms, we are solely reliant on what the government fund us, and then we have our private payers. And I've just reluctantly had to introduce premium charging to some of our rooms with en suites, which makes a bit of a difference. But where was I going with all of that? So to provide just care without that village arm, it's really tight. So for me to do what I do, I concentrate our funds on having enough staff. So I arguably have higher staffing numbers than some other sites. I still feel like I'm running on a shoestring. I don't feel like I have enough for what I'd like, but I do have more than the minimum requirements. And we still have a viable business, but we don't have anything much to put back in and do the place up. I'd love to paint the whole place. We've been trying to do that room by room, and I'd love to go through and get new furniture everywhere and update so we can't do anything much in the way of capital reinvestment, because everything that's keeping the business tuning is going back into the care side of it. So yeah, it's a really messy thing that's happened because you see your big listed companies and what they're making in profit, and then screaming out for not enough money to fund the care. But in many instances, my understanding is they're quite separate arms of their businesses. So once you're a listed company, you actually have to be making a return on people's income. And when you listen to the profits of some of the big guys and they start talking about those numbers, I mean, they're massive. But when you start talking about the debt to build and all of that real estate, it's probably still only
because you look at
6 or 8% return. You know what I say?
Yep.
It's the numbers sound massive, but when you look at the care side of it, so what those big companies are doing is building less and less care beds, so that they can have them all premium charged. A lot of them and look after the people that have come into the village, so they become sort of self-sustainable areas, which is all good on one hand, but looking to the future, like I say, who's going to look after the poor people or the average Joe Bloggs that hasn't got the money to invest in buying a unit, can't pay the premium charges, that are living their retirement on their benefit? There's no money left in there to pay premium charges. So that's why you hear the constant scream out for the government to understand that we need more money. I mean, just to put money, I mean, I hate, this is the hard part for being a nurse and an owner, is that conflict between finance and care. But the government of the day back in the 80s privatised aged care, took it out of, so back in the day you had your geriatric hospitals and wings. Those were places that I went into in my nursing training, where Nightingale wards with poor, decrepit elderly people that had pressure areas. You could put your arms in up to your elbows, and we'd all go and be trained how to pack wounds, and just horrific. And the system couldn't, so even the worst provider out there is providing. People are in home environments, they're being dressed every day, there's a huge amount of standards that have to be met. So we have to remember where it came from. This was a decision of the day to take this.
Look, and I remember that, and I also remember people getting very excited looking at the baby boomers coming through and go,
yes.
Man, this is a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
Because, they're going to come through the system. And back then, they were in their 20s and 30s. And hey presto, here they are now, just
That's
starting
right.
to.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's interesting. You drive into a place like Havelock North, and on the left there, on prime land, this beautiful, huge, thing being built by a corporate, and that's aged care.
That's right.
And
Well, that's what people think aged care is, but that's a retirement village.
yeah, and it's interesting because you look at it, it just looks profoundly expensive and glamorous and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And there's as you would know, there's families that come in to look through with their loved ones that are needing care, or dad's in the hospital and mum's coming to look, and they've never left New Zealand. They've never gone and stayed at a flash hotel or been on a cruise, or so they're looking what little boring little Cook Street office is homely and comfortable, and they feel they're with their people, as also the people that have lived their lives on cruises and with a lot of wealth want to be in lovely, beautiful surroundings, which the corporates are able to provide. And so it's not they shouldn't be there, but while they're there with the big presence that they've got, I'm very worried about what happens to the other half, 3/4 of society that
It's not so.
need subsidised care.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be having to have subsidised care in dilapidated old buildings that the owners can't afford to put that capital upgrades into, because we're all living on a shoestring. If you're being looked after, say your loved one's being looked after in one of the geriatric wards up at the hospital, they're probably being funded, I'm not sure exactly at the moment what it's at, but it's around $1,300 or $1,400 a day is the cost of their care. And then they transfer out to us in a hospital level care facility, and we're being funded $285 a day to do that care. Now, I know there's a huge difference. We haven't got the doctors on site and the pharmacists on site and the physiotherapists and all of those things. Absolutely, we can do it much cheaper than that. But that's a big decrease at $280 a day to provide 24-hour day registered nursing and healthcare assistant care, all of your meals, all of your medications, all of your doctor's visits, all of your laundry, cleaning. You're lucky to get a motel room overnight for that kind of money. So there's definitely an issue around the funding. There's no question about that. It's got to be addressed. But how that's addressed is where I feel like we've got to have that conversation around. If there's more money pouring into the sector, how do we make sure it's being sent in for staffing levels, and how, there's a huge push in other countries with having ratios, mandated ratios. Now they're tricky because you can't just go 1 to 5 because it depends on the acuity and all the rest of it. But there's a lot of knowledge in the sector. There's a lot of data around how that can all look, and like I say, I really worry that if we start taking registered nurses out of the equation, because now they're going to be really expensive if we're going to be paying them penal rates. They need to be mandated in there, or in some instances they will not be there. And research after research after research tells you that registered nurses improve outcomes for people.
My mother was in Waireka over in Paeatua, and she'd lived there for a long time, and that's where she died. And she was there just for her end of life, rather than being in a hospice. She did go into hospital for a short time, then Waireka had a bed and they cared for her, and there were registered nurses looking after her through that, and she had stunning care through that. And she wasn't that needy as such, but it was very, very cool. The biggest surprise to me in this interview, Anna, is the word or the term registered nurses has come up about 54 times.
Is that right?
It's quite a passion of yours, isn't it?
Look, yes. I believe registered nurses
55.
are the heart of care in the health system. Now, obviously we need doctors, obviously we need all our allied health people, but your registered nurse is at the bedside picking up those nuances, seeing the subtle changes in people.
Yep.
And in aged care, they're not at the bedside the same as in the hospital, but what we've done over the years is we've got a healthcare assistant team that we've worked with, so they know they're our eyes and ears, and they know when to get us, and then they love to learn from a registered nurse to increase their knowledge. And if you just take those registered nurses away and go, registered nurses just do tasks, and we can teach someone else to do those tasks, then we lose all the thinking, and we.
So tell me, what does the word registered mean?
So that means that we've met that educational requirement. We've now done a degree course to be a registered nurse. It means we've met all the competency criteria to be registered on a national register of nursing. So the Nursing Council hold that register. And with that comes a whole lot of ethics and professionalism that is mandated of a registered nurse. So there's a code of practice, code of conduct, and then to keep being registered, you have to maintain a competence every 3 years. You have to have done a certain amount of educational work. You have to have done a certain number of clinical hours, or if you're if you've got a management registration that you're managing nurses and that you're managing with a nursing focus and a healthcare focus. So it keeps you very, very accountable, and our healthcare system and the health of New Zealanders relies on us having registered nurses.
And it's a deviation from the topic, but I tried to set up something like this for farmers 20 years ago, registered farmers.
Right.
Anybody can be a farmer.
Yes.
There's no registration, there's no standards, there's no, I was going to say no ethics, there's no, it's, and all of that is true. Some, there's lots of farmers that would screaming, but anybody can be a farmer. It is ridiculous that here we look after the whenua and we look after food production and the environmental implications and all that, and there is no standard. Anybody can do it. It's just like Philly Boot son, and it's just for years. It's just ran. I just go, can you not see this? There's a bloody great big hole here. Yeah. How are you feeling?
I feel like we could chat for another couple of hours now. I'm away.
And I have, I'm not cutting you off just yet. I'm not cutting you off at all. I have really enjoyed this. Thank you. I've really enjoyed this because it's so important. And I've been through it, and I'm going to go through it again myself into the system, and I don't want to be just humped on a bloody in the back room sort of thing and forgotten about, and
well, you also don't want to be looked after by people that are doing a fabulous job but they don't know what they don't know.
And that goes back to my experience of the middle of the night or having a sister who's dying, and things like that, and having people who do know what they are about gives you a huge amount of comfort even in the worst times. I'm just trying to think, if you're in that and you're with people who've don't know what's happening,
there's opportunities in a care continuum that you can be missed, that this is the time that we need to speak, this is the time we need to exit, they make a big difference in your reflection on how you look back at those times.
I had an interesting experience recently where I had an appointment with my GP over the phone. It went really well. And she asked really, really good questions, and I'm not sure. She wanted to see me, and so I had one appointment over the phone, one in person, one on the phone, and then the next one in a few months is back in person again. And her ability to ask questions on the phone was really, I think I listened more being on the phone than if I'd been in the room, whatever it's called.
Right.
Yeah.
And look, I think for episodic events, that online over the phone stuff is good. The virtual nurse idea, if you need to ring somebody overnight, I need a second pair of ears on this or another brain to think about this, absolutely
Has its place, eh?
has its place. For continuation of care where you're not building any relationship with the residents, the families, you're just having an episodic care. Can you talk to this family? Their mother's dying and they're not sure what's going on, and you've never laid eyes on that person. Yeah, not so cool.
No.
No.
Anna, any last thoughts or views you want to drop into this podcast?
I don't think so. I guess one of the things before we started this is you said you'd like to talk to me because you don't know anything about aged care and you'd like to know more. Is there anything that you'd like to ask me?
Oh, look, the thing that because I was intrigued with this industry that I see that looks very bloody wealthy and growing and big amounts of capital going into it. So it's been interesting to see that. The thing I've learnt is I didn't realise there was such a pay difference between registered nurses and aged care. That was a surprise to me. I think I knew this was the case. It's lovely to hear your passion for wanting to do this work, and because I couldn't do it, and I think, why the fuck would they want to do that? Truly.
Yeah. Well, and there's a certain person that does want to do it, and if you don't want to do it, don't do it, because it's not something that that's easy. But the rewards are massive. Not even part of the reward I get as a leader is seeing the joy that my staff bring to families and residents, and the friendships that they have with each other and those bonds. So it's sort of the whole thing is very people centred and person centred and yeah.
And the irony of just having that meal on Friday night with my friends, and they talked about that all the stuff turned out.
Yeah.
And they're just going, a whole lot of people they hadn't never seen before, and they went, oh, yeah, we knew your mother, and just go. They had a whole other family.
Families often say that to me, because in that period of time after the person passes, there'll be a constant stream of staff that want to pop in and say goodbye, and clean, including the kitchen staff, the cleaning staff, those staff members have a huge bond. The cleaner is in there every day, and she's in our instance, she's the cleaner and does all the laundry. So bringing back people's laundry that they've folded up lovingly and returning back, and they have neat conversations and they get to know those people. And I think that for families, particularly if they're out of town or can't visit all the time, they sometimes don't fully understand that their loved one is not alone. That they might say to them, I haven't seen anyone today. No one's been to see me. I haven't seen my daughter for 3 weeks. But actually, during the course of that day, they've got staff in to get them up for breakfast. They're in the shower. They've got the cleaning staff coming through. They've got the DT that's popping in and out, or they're involved in some activities. They've got someone back to give them lunch. They're off to the bathroom, whatever, and they have quite, compared to being that lonely person sitting in their own home hoping to be able to stagger backwards and forwards to the bathroom and get Meals on Wheels so they never have to go near an aged care facility. Actually, once they get in there, there's a whole community and a whole life that can, and we've got data now through some of those tools that we use in the sector that shows the depression scores and loneliness scores of people that are assessed before they come into care, and then the huge increase in quality of life that people have once they've arrived into care. So it's not we're not the places that everyone should fear.
And they talked about their 92-year-old father.
Yes.
Who had just lost his wife.
Yeah.
And, he was very sad. And they go, Dad, how you doing here? And he says, I'm good. I'm fine. I've got my family here. He felt
Yes.
he wasn't depressed about this, and it was just like, this is another, and they said he could last easily another 10 years. And he's going, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
And just going. And look, the this friend of mine would say she'd go and see her mother twice a week, and sometimes she'd be walking in and she'd hear her mother talking to a nurse, going, that she never comes to see me. She never comes to see me, and they're going, she comes to see you twice a week, and she'll be here this morning to her. No, she never comes to see me. And around the corner she goes, said, see, here she is. Oh, hello, dear. It's just
It is the lament. My daughter never comes to see me. I don't know what it is. I think it's that no matter how often family come to see you, it's not enough.
It's not enough.
That's all people want at the end of their life is time with their loved ones, isn't it? And we're all so blimmin' busy that it's hard.
And it is important. I've had the deep privilege of spending time with my parents and my sister when they died, and I had 7 weeks with my sister and about a month with my mother, and less with my father, but had time with them, and it is a magic time.
It is.
It's a magic time.
It is. Yeah.
It's and if you're not there, you can't. It's gone.
Yeah.
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 And at my mother's funeral, I got up and talked about my time with her in the hospital, because when she learnt that she had terminal cancer, that this 85-year-old went, well, fuck, I've been good all my life, and now I'm not going to be. And she was totally, because I'd say to the nurses, is this the medication? They went, no, she's hardly anything. They said, no, welcome to your mother. This is who she wanted to be. And because she'd grown up in a very strict environment and been a good girl.
Yeah.
And at a funeral, I said, oh, I'm so pleased she's dead. I said, I need a break. And it was really interesting to get to know my mother through that time, And with all that wonderful care, I didn't have to do all the heavy lifting. I could just turn up and be with her.
Be the son.
Yeah. And thank you for doing your work. On behalf of all the people listening that will listen to this, because they can't thank you, but thank you for doing work. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bashing the system.
Yeah.
Don't give up.
No, I don't want to bash the system. I want to just work with the system. I want to be part of it instead of sitting on the outside.
Don't bash the system. Good luck.
Yeah.
Pretending not to bash the system and working with it. Wrong choice of word, but yeah, from everybody listening, thank you.
My privilege.
Thanks for listening in. We're Collective Intelligence, a one-of-a-kind people ecosystem that takes inspiration from Mother Nature. To find out how we reimagine leadership development, visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz.